So picking up from the talk last night, we have to ask the question, what is it like to step across the threshold of your own life? What's that like? This is a question I think that any tradition dares us not only to ask, but to discover with our own 2 feet. This, after all, is called a path. We call this practice following the way. It has its roots in things like the Tao, all of which suggest a path walked by human beings. And I've always valued the fact that before the Buddha could be depicted figuratively, he would often be portrayed simply as a footprint pressed into the earth. A simple footprint pressed into the mud sometimes. We all know how lovely mud is. Who hasn't enjoyed that feeling of pressing their feet into squelchy mud and having all of that liquid come tickling up through the toes? And how alive that feels. How connected, exhilarating, in fact. We all know this feeling. It's something that calls us back to a childhood, to an innocence, to a pleasure of just being here on this earth. And I would even say more. I think this pleasure and this contact that we feel when we press our feet into the mud of the earth also teaches us to walk with care. I don't know about you, but if I'm ever walking in a place that has lots of those delicate glowing green mosses, I almost feel like a vandal just being near them, let alone stepping on them. And yet all life is as delicate as this. All life is asking us to walk with care, to tread the path with care. These happen to have been the Buddha's very final words before his parinibbana. Walk the path with care. So how do we do this as the clumsy human beings that we are? After all, there's plenty that gets broken along the way. Plenty that gets trampled on and injured and hurt. And this is why the symbol on the back of our rakusus is so valuable to keep close on the back of our neck. You will have seen it, this interesting green shape, which is actually the image of a broken pine needle. It's actually reminding us that when we walk, things get broken. Things do get hurt. There is no way to walk this path without doing it in a karmic way. And I also like the fact that this symbol, even though it shows the broken pine needle, ends up illustrating a picture of a mountain, a green mountain. As if to remind us that this is a mountain path. We climb up great hills in this life and we descend wonderful valleys. We have the highs and lows of even just a single round of Zazen. I think we can all attest to that. So this practice of following the ups and downs, the highs and lows, walking a mountain path is our family style. This is what we commit ourselves to in a Zen practice. And there's a case from Entangling Vines that takes this up explicitly, and I want to share it with you because it's very much to this point. It's actually case 100 from that wonderful collection. It's called Straw Sandals in My Vestment. It says that one day a monk asked wayfarer Fat Song, "What is your style of practice?" Fat Song replied, "Straw sandals in my vestment." "What does that mean?" asked the monk. Fatsong said, it means I walk down the mountain in my bare feet. I walk down the mountain in my bare feet. We all know the difference between being clad in garments, clad in all sorts of identities perhaps, and being naked. When we walk with bare feet down a mountain path, we're feeling every single stick and stone and squishy bit of puddle, every slippery leaf. We're feeling everything. And the house style that Fatsong here is bowing to is saying, why not let our whole body be this barefoot? Why not let our whole life be this barefoot? And this is something that we long for, is it not? There's something in our hearts that longs to return to this barefoot life, return to the mountains naked in our awareness. And Mary Oliver has a poem that actually appeals to this longing to return to mountains naked. And it's called The Poet Dreams of the Mountain. Here it is. She says, sometimes I grow weary of the days with all their fits and starts. I want to climb some old grey mountain slowly, taking the rest of my lifetime to do it, resting often, sleeping under the pines or above them on the unclothed rocks. I want to see how many stars are still in the sky that we have smothered for years now, a century at least. I want to look back at everything, forgiving it all, and peaceful, knowing that the last thing that there is to know cannot be known. All that urgency, not what the earth is about. How silent the trees, their poetry being of themselves only. I want to take slow steps and think appropriate thoughts. In 10,000 years, maybe, a piece of the mountain will fall. Perhaps all of us here have shared in this longing. Here we are on a mountain, walking this mountain in all of our wonderful breaks and outdoor kinhin. We want to slow down, to feel this mountain, to let it in, to let it receive us too, to actually heal the gap between person and mountain. So how do we do this? How do we heal this gap? Well, in the 11th century, there was a wonderful teacher called Thurong Dalkai, who walked into his assembly just like this and said, the green mountains are always walking. And that's a short Teisho, a very short Teisho. And yet it ricochets through the ages. Still ricocheting now, echoing off all the rocks of time into this room right now. And perhaps even Thurong's walking would have been enough. Perhaps that was all that needed to be demonstrated. But the words are valuable. And Thurong is a very interesting character. It's said in the record that he began his spiritual questing and life as a Taoist sorcerer. There aren't enough Taoist sorcerers around.
Teisho.
But it's wonderful, isn't it, that Thurong actually has this foot in Taoism. He went on to study with the great teacher Taozi and became Taozi's Dharma heir. But this original foot, literal foot in Taoism is valuable because Zen too has its early feet in Taoism. And Taoism has its feet all over the mountains. Taoism is completely at home in the mountains. if it's not riding some cloud off somewhere. In fact, so much Chinese poetry is devoted to this image of the Taoist master in the mountain. There's a whole subgenre, actually, of poems that I love, which always come under the banner of climbing the mountain in search of the Taoist master and not finding him. And what a relatable thing that is. Just think of your own life, the way we search for that master. We search for that Taoist master. We search for the answer. We walk up all sorts of strange trails. We get lost in all sorts of thickets of the forest. We get cold, we shiver. We get too hot, we get thirsty. We are so thirsty for the Tao, so thirsty for the way. But we do not find the master. But what about every single step we've taken? Might it be that every single step that we have taken, every single impression there on the earth is the master that we have been looking for? Is the response of the earth that we have been looking for? Is the natural return, the welcoming of the earth that we have so desperately been looking for? Well, if it's impossible to find a Taoist master in the mountains, let's go and find a Zen one. And I know that Han Shan is a favourite of this Sanga's. Han Shan, Cold Mountain, the poet, the recluse, fascinating person of the way in the Tang dynasty of China, who lived in a cave, spent his days foraging for roots and grubs and leaves and whatever would sustain him, scribbling poems onto rocks and cliffs and branches and leaves, for other people later to find and collate in wonder, actually, that such a person could exist. And here's one of Han Shan's self-portraits that was collected in just this way and put into a wonderful collection of his poems. It's a kind of self-portrait, a very interesting self-portrait of Han Shan's. And of course, Han Shan means cold mountain, and the mountain that he lived on was called Cold Mountain. This was a very traditional thing to have happen, that a teacher or a master or a poet would take their name from the mountain. So here's the poem. Rough and dark, the cold mountain trail. Sharp cobbles, the icy creek bank. Yammering, chirping, always birds. Bleak, alone, not even a lone hiker. Whip, whip, the wind slaps my face. Whirled and tumbled, snow piles on my back. Morning after morning, I don't see the sun. Year after year, not a sign of spring. Now, is this not naked verse? Naked experience? Can't you feel the slap of that wind? Can't you feel the snow on your own back? And as we read into this, it becomes harder and harder to say whether this is Han Shan the poet speaking or Han Shan the mountain speaking. Is the wind slapping Han Shan's face, or is it slapping the mountain face? Is snow piling up on Han Shan's back or on the mountain's back? Can't say. Can't say. These two personages are indistinguishable. They are no longer drawing a line between self and other. It is just this. It is just being. It is just returning to what Han Shan, Cold Mountain truly is, together. So Gary Snyder, who actually happened to be the translator of that version of Han Shan's poem, is another great mountain person, a mountain man of the way. So many of his own poems are about mountains. sometimes about crawling on hands and knees through the thickets of mountains to discover what it's like to be animal on mountain, human animal perhaps on mountain. But Gary Snyder says this. He says, mountains and streams are the processes of the earth. They are process, essence, action, absence. They roll being and non-being together. They are what we are. We are what they are. And so, he says, in our own lives, the mountains walk to the kitchen and back to the shop, to the desk, to the stove. We sit on the park bench and let the wind and the rain drench us. The mountains walk out to put another coin in the parking meter and go down to the 7-Eleven. The mountains march out to the sea, shoulder the sky for a while, and slip back into the waters. This is becoming mountain. This is realising mountain. And this is the great turn of our practice. To actually turn our hearts around to receive this fact, this obvious fact, and we allow it to be as obvious as it actually is. And I want to explore this turn of practice because it is very interesting and very subtle. And it's taken up in another case from Dogen's collection of 300 koans. This is case number 16 from the collection. It says that Changsha, the old teacher, was asked by a monastic, how do you turn the mountains, rivers and great earth and return to the self? Changsha responded, how do you turn the self and return to the mountains, rivers and great earth? I like that it's a monastic asking this question here. There's something about the cloistered experience of some people when they get contained in a way. It's almost a bit like creating an environment that you believe is conducive to practice that might actually improve this self. Remember, this monastic's question is, how do I turn the mountains and the rivers and the great earth in such a way that I can return to myself? But Changsha says, no. Turn the self. Let go of the self. Turn yourself around and confirm your own true nature, which is the mountains, the rivers, the great wide earth. And how interesting that this turn pivots on a notion of self. Whenever we notice that creeping introduction of a self that wants, a self that claims, a self that says it knows, a self that resists, a self that reviles. It can be such a subtle thing, but when we notice, we can return to mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun, the moon and the stars, and discover peace once more. Return to our true place once more. And of course, this is breaking down the barrier of that monastery, breaking down the walls of self, escaping the prison of self, you might say. And I remember years ago, I was actually working at a prison for almost 2 years. I ran a night art class on a Thursday evening at a local prison. It was a beautiful thing to do. We used to have about 8 or 10 people would come in, sometimes more if they believed there was going to be free stuff handed out. Suddenly 30 people would show up. But this regular 8 or 10 people wanted to just be with each other, sit with each other, actually be vulnerable with each other, a kind of sanctuary there of just 2 hours on a Thursday evening. I remember one time I was teaching this class of enthusiasts just how to mix colour, to match it to what they see. Just how to put all those primary colours together to make tertiary colours, to go on and on and on, and to keep mixing until you felt that this did match what it was that you saw. There was one bloke in particular who was very taken with this project. He thought it was fascinating. He spent hours just there, just mixing colours and looking around. And anyway, the class left, but when I came back the next week, he was there early. He said, Keenan, come here. I said, what? He said, prison is so boring. Every night I go for a jog around the perimeter because there is nothing else to do. I just jog round and round and round and round. But this week, as I was jogging round and round and round, I looked up at the mountains. And every time I did a lap, they were a different colour. Every time. So this is not just green mountains walking. This is green, yellow, orange, red, violet mountains running. This is change itself and falling in love with change itself, marveling at change itself. Because what is walking or running or even moving but change itself? When we truly experience our own walking, and remember Dogen says, if you doubt the green mountains walking, you do not know your own walking. So get to know your own walking. Experience the change, the vitality of your own walking, and you will find that you are never alone. You are never alone. So why is this important? Why does it even matter? Well, to experience the mountain as mountain, the changeability and transience of mountain and mountain as mountain, teaches us to think like a mountain. And many people here will be alert to the fact that thinking like a mountain has been a kind of rallying cry for the activist movement in the environmental world. Think like a mountain, learn to think like a mountain. And this phrase, think like a mountain, actually traces its origins right back to 1949. It's not new. It's not new. It was actually mentioned in a brief essay by Aldo Leopold, a very interesting writer, who initially was an advocate for things like culling wolves, but then he learnt the error of that arrogance. He was an advocate because he felt it would promote the deer population, but he discovered what it meant to meddle, with the mountains. And this is what he said. I have lived to see state after state extirpate its wolves. I have watched the face of many a newly wolfless mountain and seen the south-facing slopes wrinkle with a maze of new deer trails. I've seen every edible bush and seedling browsed, first to anemic desuetude and then to death. I have seen every edible tree defoliated to the height of a saddle horn. Such a mountain looks as if someone had given God new pruning shears and forbidden him all other exercise. In the end, the starved bones of the hoped-for deer herd, dead of its own too much, bleached with the bones of the dead sage, and then moulder under the high-lined junipers. This dead of its own too much. We certainly run the risk of having this as our epitaph as a species. Dead of our own too much. So this is something that I know pierces everybody here. This terrible realization that we are trampling the earth. And via our arrogance and our limited foresight, we are not thinking like a mountain. and we are certainly not walking as mountain. So what can we do? What can we do? Well, I was buoyed a little bit in the 2018 Nobel acceptance speech by Olga Tokarczuk. I don't know if people know her work, Polish writer, wonderful, sprawling, creative, brilliant writer. And in that speech, she actually went straight to this dilemma, went straight to this point, identified that we are living a kind of divorced life on this planet, and that so much of our time is spent co-opted by the internet, co-opted by screens, co-opted by a glossy fantasy life. And meanwhile, life is dying of its own too much. So she asks some questions. And she's asking this of writers, but she's asking it of everybody. She says, could there be a story that would go beyond the uncommunicative prison of one's own self? Can we get beyond this prison? Can we look up from these prison walls of self? Yes, she says, there can. And she goes on to say that this new story that she says has to include people, plants, animals and objects in the common space that she calls the world. This new kind of narrator must be a mysterious, tender narrator. A narrator with a point of view or perspective from which everything can be seen. And when she says seeing everything, she means recognizing the ultimate fact that all things that exist are mutually connected, which results in a completely different kind of responsibility to the world. Now, we took our walk, almost a yatra, up the hill today to pay our respects to Kanani up there. And I was struck, we're almost like a little mountain range, a little black mountain range wandering up, following this wonderful mountain path. And it was done so tenderly. There was a great tenderness. You could see people reaching out, just touching or stroking a tree, brushing a fern, pausing to feel and appreciate and drink in with their nostrils everything that was happening there. The cool, the dark, and the bright, that luminous haze of the mountain meeting us at the top there. It was all so tender, in such a way that it feels like everything can be seen at once. Everything is appreciated in a kind of 360-degree way. So this is tender walking. And telling about it, actually sharing what you have experienced, is being a tender, a mysterious and tender narrator of life. We talk about settling, touching, and conveying the heart-mind. What you experience on a walk such as that can be shared. It's a tender thing to share it. It's an honest and beautiful thing to share. So why not? Why not share it? And in a way, it was shared when we came back down. We wove our way back through those trees, came back and assembled in that wonderful circle. And you could feel that sort of exhale from people. Wow. And then Lizzie, wonderfully, just turned and said, "Thank you, Kunyani." And then, as if still addressing the mountain, went on to say, "Please return to the dojo as quickly as possible." And here we are. The mountain walked right back into this place. So we are the Green Mountains walking. The Green Mountains walking are us. The green mountains need our feet, they need our arms, they need our eyes, and they need our tongues. So this is our practice. Walk it with care. Thank you for